this deep, where suns dissolve and drowned gods sleep, where coils of thought no mind can keep. Leviathan, Leviathan, heir of chaos, spawn of night, before the word divided light, he dreamed in coils of iron might. Leviathan waits beneath, scales of basalt and eyes of flame. No mortal tongue dare speak his name. For sanity itself goes lame when whispers reach the shore. He roils the abyss with curling spine, a priest of darkness, serpentine, where time and form unholy twine, and memory is drowned. The sea is temple, cold and vast, a crypt for futures and for past. He slumbers in its blackened cast and claims all things undone. Job heard his maker voice the threat. Can you with hook this beast beset? His armored hide your sword forget. He yields to none but me. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 21 CD podcast. As always, I'm your ghost, John. If this is your first time here, greetings. Lately, I have been working on a book. Technically my fourth book, but the first one that I think I'm actually going to release, and it was inspired by this research, to be honest. Something just kicked within me, and I had to give it life. I want you to imagine this. Your ship is struck by some kind of weapon, invisible until the moment of impact. But in that climactic moment is the sun. Unimaginable blinding brightness. It's a sort of finite blindness. There is nowhere forward, only heat and pressure and burning. And then silence. The ringing in your ears begins to fade. The screaming, the fleshy sounds of conscious and unconscious bodies being traumatized. The coma fades, but you really wish it wouldn't. And you're about to wish even more that the deathly embrace could hold you forever. Somehow you made it into the life raft, but also somehow only you made it into the life raft. You're so very much alone, and also, coincidentally, so very much adrift. There's very little in the raft with you, enough for maybe a few days before you need to figure out how to obtain drinkable water and eatable food. But before you can even begin to tackle overcoming the fear of death by starvation, a different fear will need to be conquered. The fear of the deep. You see, you were never supposed to be here. This biome is not for your kind. There is no reprieve for one of your biological inabilities here. The outcome would be the same should a deer be dropped in the middle of the ocean. Doom, certain doom, and it is all but certain to be yours alone, apparently. You are the lone island upon the eyeball of the abyss, the outermost barrier that will not only accept, but will swallow you whole and beckon you deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to the very bottom, where you will be the only one there. Endlessly, you would wander into a realm greater than you have ever known. After all, 71% of Earth's surface is covered in water. It's an eternity to the bottom, and it will cost you your life, ensuring a shadow burial as you pass on to the next realm, completely intoxicated by the lack of oxygen in your brain. They say that once you get past the initial fear, it's actually not such a bad way to go. It's a hunger that can't be satisfied. It's a good old-fashioned drowning. And it has been called nothing but a malfunction, this hallucination effect in the brain. But the brain, starved of oxygen, will perform erratically, like a body thrashing against an unseen pack of predatory dogs. Neurons will sputter like dying stars. They will light up in a final display of their talents, painting the wildest of images in our final moments. The brain's final gift to the victim of this most lonely and cold of deaths. The final gesture as the body bids farewell to the soul. A sort of numinous display of the understanding that it cannot save us, but it can hold us as we go. It's a gift from God. It is also possible that you will be consumed by sharks or whatever else roams this plane of abysmal existence. There are great presences all around you, and it's so very strange how where there is nothing, it appears that the gods chatter the loudest. They can't shut up. It drives you mad. Once you begged for a sign from the heavens, from the gods, from God. Now you cannot wait for them to relieve you with their silence. The universe is a fist that you have found yourself clenched in. It's as if you could ascend as the sky becomes visible between the great fingers of your affliction. But then, just as quickly, your hopes and your faith are snuffed out as the grip of this abhorrent reality tightens. You beg God not to abandon you here with these lowly, warlike water spirits. The way they speak to you in languages you understand without knowing, and hear without feeling, it confuses and confounds the deepest part of your psychology. You're an ant without a colony in this place, unclaimed, good only for consumption, with nothing else to contribute to the ecosystem but your body. Your education, your way with words, your skills that you've honed, they're of little use to the kind of this realm, the beings that are here, and so you are destined to be consumed. All thoughts swimming through your brain as you look over the edge of the life raft and into the abyss. But why are we so afraid of the ocean? Is it what's down there? Is it simply because we are not swimming creatures? Why does the ocean give most people an overwhelming sense of dread akin to the ice-cold vastness of space? We're clearly not made for the ocean biome, and yet there is so very much ocean. I would wager a guess and say that most likely there used to be a lot less water. Since the flood, the planet's surface is now mostly water. And you're right to be afraid of monsters down there, roaming around, both mindlessly as instinctual members of the megalithic and bizarre branch of the animal kingdom, and also as potentially spiritual beings. Beings like the Kraken. Although Sri Lanka is not normally associated with sightings or strandings of the elusive giant squid, the island does figure in a most mysterious and dramatic encounter between a ship and this insanely horrifying creature. It is pretty unfortunate that the facts concerning the encounter in question have never been completely substantiated, but such a thing is nearly impossible to do when such a thing that is being reported is otherworldly. Nevertheless, the corroborated account of the sinking of the schooner Pearl in 1874 appears entirely plausible. The giant squid symbolizes an extraordinary paradox at the dawn of the 21st century. While humankind endeavors to detect signs of life in the solar system and beyond, there is an enormous creature inhabiting the oceans of our planet, no living specimen of which has yet been observed by science. But we have gotten close. It's an astonishing figure that occasionally washes up on beaches, and invariably damaged carcasses then subsequently provide the sole clues as to the natural history of the giant squid. There are no photographs, no moving images. Aptly, it has been tagged as the least known large animal on Earth. It is also the last monster to be conquered, allegedly. Some 20 meters long, with multiple appendages, arrays of hooks, claws, and suction cups, the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, a misplaced parrot-like beak, and the ability to change color. The giant squid is not only monstrous, but essentially alien, and the examples of the not-so-giant squid, but still freaking enormous squid that we do have are pretty scary. So imagine seeing something 20 times bigger. From the Kraken of antiquity, with which it has been identified, to the beast of Peter Benchley's 1991 novel of the same name, the giant squid has been represented as a massive, terrifying monster from the depths. Little wonder that it now lurks in the nether regions of the subconscious, especially when all of these stories about shipwrecks and pirates and sea battles and all that kind of stuff. Back in the mid-19th century, even less was known about the giant squid, or calamari, as it was often called. The first reliably documented encounter between a ship and a giant squid occurred in 1861 near Tenerife, when the French warship Electon had happened upon one and attacked it with harpoons and guns, and that was their first mistake. One lucky shot, however, did happen to hit a vital organ on the monster, and the unfortunate creature then proceeded to vomit up blood, according to reports. The crew threw a noose around it to haul it aboard, but the rope sliced through the soft flesh of the body, and the head and tentacles sank. It's very unfortunate. In June 1874, reports started to appear in the Indian newspapers about an incident in the Bay of Bengal in which a 150-ton schooner had been attacked and dragged under by a gigantic squid in full view of an additional passing ship. And then, a few weeks later, on July 4th, an account was published in the trustworthy London Times. The following strange story has been communicated to the Indian newspapers, it began. The first part of the account was by a passenger who had been on board the steamer Strathowen, and he reported we had just left Colombo, had rounded Galle, and were well in the Bay of Bengal with our course laid for Madras, steaming over a calm and tranquil sea. About an hour before sunset on the 10th of May, we saw on our starboard beam. For those who don't know, ship turns, starboard would be you're looking off the right side of your ship. They saw about 2 miles off a small schooner lying becalmed, and there was nothing in her appearance or position to excite remark, but as we came up with her, I lazily examined her with my binocular, and then noticed between us, but nearer to her, a long, low swelling on the sea, which, from its color and shape, I took to be a bank of seaweed. As I watched, the mast was set in motion. It struck the schooner, which visibly reeled at the impact, and then righted itself. Immediately afterwards, the mast swayed sideways, and I could clearly discern the enormous mass and the hull of the schooner coalescing. I can think of no other term. Almost immediately after the collision and coalescence of the schooner's masts swayed toward us lower and lower, the vessel was on her beam ends. She's almost sideways at this point, and she lay there for a few seconds and then simply disappeared. the masts righting themselves as she sank, and the main exhibiting a reversed ensign struggling toward its peak. The second part of the Times report consisted of the account of the captain of the schooner, James Floyd. He stated that the Pearl, as tight a little craft as ever sailed the seas, had left the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius bound for Rangoon with a crew of 6 and a hold full of ballast. She was due to return to Mauritius with a cargo of rice. On the outbound leg of the journey, though, the Pearl had put into the port of Galle for water. According to Captain Floyd, the Pearl left Galle on May 7th and sailed along the south coast of Ceylon, and she would have passed the Great Basses Lighthouse, an impressive feat of engineering that had only commenced operation the year before, and then headed northeast into the Bay of Bengal towards Rangoon. 3 days out of Galle on May 10th, the schooner was becalmed at latitude 8° 50' north, longitude 85° 5' east. The position is about 170 miles due east of Vandalus Bay. Around 5 p.m. on that fateful day, Captain Floyd sighted the Strathowen a few miles off. A short time later, as the Pearl lay becalmed, a great mass, he said, rose slowly out of the sea about half a mile off on our larboard side, that'll be your left side, and remained spread out, as it were, and stationary. It looked like the back of a huge whale, but it sloped less and was a brownish color. Even at that distance, it looked longer than our craft, and it seemed to be basking in the sun. "What's that?" I sung out to the mate. "Blessed if I knows, barring its size, color, and shape. It could be a whale," replied Tom Scott. "And it ain't the Serpent," said one of the crew, "for he's too round for that 'ere critter." At this point, Captain Floyd rushed to his cabin to fetch his rifle, and when he returned to the deck, he hurriedly took aim at the advancing creature. As it happened, there was a Newfoundlander among the crew called Bill Darling, who not only knew that it was a giant squid, but also understood that bullets were essentially ineffectual against such soft flesh and merely served to enrage. Perhaps he had seen a stranded specimen back home. It is significant that Newfoundland had a spate of strandings during this time. Or maybe he heard some other seafarers' tales of an earlier giant squid attack on a ship. But in any event, when he saw the captain preparing to fire, Darling held up his hand in warning and exclaimed, "Have a care, master. That squid will capsize us if you hurt him." Regrettably, Captain Floyd took no notice of the sailor, with disastrous and tragic consequences. Smiling at the idea, he candidly related, "I let fly and hit him, and with that, the beast shook. There was a great ripple all around him, and he began to move. 'Out with your axes and knives,' shouted Bill, 'and cut at any part of him that comes aboard. Look alive, and Lord help us.' Not aware of the danger, and never having seen or heard of such a monster, I gave no orders, and it was no use touching the helm or ropes to get out of the way." For a ship's captain, this is a remarkable public confession. His excuse that he was unable to give orders to the crew, having never seen or heard of such a monster, is lame. It is in such dire circumstances that a captain is expected to make whatever decisions are necessary to save his ship. So, first of all, not a very good captain. Captain Floyd, do better. Instead, Captain Floyd allowed Bill Darling to give the orders himself, the guy that he didn't even listen to. And that guy, Darling, rallied the crew. The captain, Captain Floyd, knew that he had failed his crew, he expressed. He said, "By this time, 3 of the crew, Bill included, had found axes, and one had a rusty cutlass, and all were looking over the ship's side at the advancing monster. We could now see a huge oblong mass moving by jerks just under the surface of the water, and an enormous train following. The wake, or train, might have been 100 feet long itself. In the time I have taken to write this, the brute struck us, and the ship quivered under the thud. In another movement, monstrous arms like trees seized the vessel, and she keeled over. In another second, the monster was aboard, squeezed in between the two masts. Bill was screaming, "Slash for your lives!" But all our slashing was to no avail, for the brute, holding on by his arms, slipped his vast body overboard and pulled the vessel down with him. We were thrown into the water at once, and just as I went over, I caught sight of one of the crew, either Bill or Tom Fielding, squashed up between the masts and one of those awful arms. After a few seconds, the Pearl filled with water and went under, along with the hapless Bill Darling and Tom Fielding. Captain Floyd and the 4 surviving crew members were picked up by the Strathowen. All were eager to tell their rescuers of the horrific experience they had undergone. According to the passenger quoted earlier, each narrator had his own version of the story, but in the main, all the narratives tallied so remarkably as to leave no doubt of the fact. People who are speculative say that, well, there's not really any official narrative or record of the Strathowen itself, and especially not the Strathowen doing this, but despite this, the marine writer Frank Lane felt confident enough to declare the most reasonable explanation seems to be that the account was a report of an actual incident, including the presence of the Pearl, of a man from the one place, Newfoundland, where at that time, giant squids and their behavior were reasonably well known. Every time one story about the Kraken or some deep sea monster is disproven enough to sort of lull the masses back into their fabricated reality that there are no monsters out there, then another one pops up. Another story, another monster, another tale to disprove, another photo to call fake, another testament to call unsubstantiated. Stories of the Kraken or some gigantic tentacled entity are literally as endless as the waves themselves. You would think a beast of such magnitude would exist in religious texts somewhere then, right? The issue with the Kraken itself is that it seems to be distinctly Norse. So it's not in the Bible. It's specifically Norse in origin, from Old Norwegian kraka, meaning something twisted or unhealthy. The first written references appear in Scandinavian lore in the 18th century. And in that lore, written by Erik Pontoppidan's Natural History of Norway in 1752, he described a monstrous creature so large that it was mistaken for an island, and when sailors anchored, it would drag them under. You also have Rahab. Psalm 89:10 says, "You crushed Rahab like one of the slain. With your strong arm, you scattered your enemies." It's another sea monster reference in Hebrew text, and sometimes symbolic of Egypt, but also envisioned as a chaos serpent or a sea beast of some sort. Then you have Tiamat from the Mesopotamian religion, a Babylonian goddess represented as a giant sea serpent or dragon, slain by Marduk, who forms the world from her body. Then in the biblical Apocrypha, you have 1st Enoch and other non-canonical Jewish texts that mention monstrous creatures imprisoned at the ends of the earth or seas. Not named Kraken specifically, but sometimes described in vague, gigantic sea monster terms. Greco-Roman sources like Pliny the Elder writes about giant squid-like creatures called polypus, which is Latin for many feet. Then you have Poseidon's sea monsters in Homer and other myths. Remember, we believe that myths and legends and lore and these oral accounts, these oral histories, they may actually be glamorized histories. Not everything that's in those myths and legends and lores is fake. But perhaps more fearsome than all of these monsters and lowercase g gods is the incomprehensible Leviathan of the Bible. So fearsomely and magnificently described is the Leviathan that it makes the megalodon look like a puppy. Many believe that it is a metaphor for something else, and that is due largely to how it's described, but also just because of the sheer insanity of this being. But that's the thing about cosmic and existential horror. It's so magnificent that your brain would simply explode at the realization of it. It cannot handle it. An entire verse in the Bible, Job 41, is set aside to describe the horror of Leviathan. It says, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord, which thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thine hand upon him, remember the battle, do no more. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. Who can discover the face of his garment, or who can come to him with his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together that they cannot be sundered. By his neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. In his neck remaineth strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. His heart is as firm as a stone, yea, as hard as a piece of the nether millstone. When he raiseth up himself, the mighty are afraid. By reason of breakings they purify themselves. The sword that layeth upon him cannot hold, nor the spear or dart. He esteemeth iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Slingstones are turned with him into stubble. Darts are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the shaking of a spear. Sharp stones are under him. He spreadeth sharp-pointed things upon the mire. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. He maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be hoary. Upon earth there is not his like, who is made without fear. He beholdeth all high things. He is a king over all the children of pride. Psalm 74:13-14 says, Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Psalm 104:25-26 says, So is this great and wide sea, wherein are things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts. There go the ships. There is that Leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein. Isaiah 27:1 says, In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. Venturing beyond the Bible into Bible-adjacent texts, we have 1 Enoch 60:7 through 10 that says, "On that day 2 monsters will be parted, one monster a female named Leviathan, to dwell in the abysses of the ocean over the fountains of the waters, but the other, a male named Behemoth, occupies with his breast the trackless desert named Dendane, on the east of the garden where the elect and righteous dwell, where my grandfather was taken up, the 7th from Adam, the first man whom the Lord of spirits created. And I besought the other angel that he should show me the might of those monsters, how they were parted on one day and cast, and one into the abysses of the sea, and the other unto the dry land of the desert. And he said to me, Son of man, herein thou dost seek to know what is hidden." 1 Enoch 60:24 says, "These 2 monsters are prepared to become the nourishment of the chosen and blessed." 2 Baruch, the Apocalypse of Baruch, says, "And Behemoth shall be revealed from his place, and Leviathan shall ascend from the sea, those 2 great monsters which I created on the 5th day of creation, and shall have kept until that time, and then they shall be for food for all that are left." And then in the Talmud, we see Rabbi Yochanan said, "When the Holy One, blessed be he, saw that the world could not endure 2 Leviathans, he took and slew the female and salted her away for the righteous in the world to come. For it is said, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea." Rabbi Dimi of Nachardia said, "Leviathan's skin is to be spread for the righteous to gaze upon the delights of the world to come. For it is said, they shall spread it as a tent over them, and its flesh will be served as a feast for the righteous." So whether we believe that Leviathan is a proverb, a metaphor, a fancy, a story, or not, we do see a number of religious texts that say there are monsters in the sea. Even when we talk about Leviathan, he's usually mentioned alongside other dragons of the sea. It's not just one dragon of the sea. There are dragons therein. No mortal has penned a modern record that dares to name Leviathan outright, though. No surviving log or affidavit will admit, "I saw the ancient serpent of Scripture itself." It would appear that if you saw Leviathan, that's the last thing to happen to you. For though the name is unspoken, uninked in the official annals, the shape, the unspeakable archetype, has coiled through centuries of testimony, scrawled in trembling hand upon the margins of ships' logs, whispered in ale-soaked terror by men who would rather just forget. Even in the days of Israel, Leviathan was no mere animal, but the living embodiment of chaos itself, the ungovernable deep. A thing too vast for naming, a terror so primeval it had to be tamed with scripture. But words are fragile wards against what waits below. The sea has never cared for our opinions on it. Cultures called it by the words that they had. If they are seeing these great monsters, these different cultures, what you have to look for is the synchronicities between cultures. Though I firmly believe that we're reporting dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of creatures being seen in all of these legends and lores and talked about by all these different cultures. I think it's also possible that some of the biggest of these creatures may actually be the same creature, even if they're described differently, or the same type of creature. Maybe they're not seeing the Leviathan, but maybe they are seeing the Megalodon or something like that. Maybe there are multiple Megalodons. You know, we have that account of that great white shark. It was like one of the biggest great white sharks we ever had. And we had a tracker on it, and it was eaten. And we saw the tracker descend into the depths of the ocean, completely ripped out of this shark, and obviously in the stomach of some bigger shark. So there's something down there. Cultures call these things by the words they have: sea serpent, kraken, dragon, megalodon, leviathan. Names are essentially our frail attempt at control. But even Jewish sailors knew enough not to seek it as Leviathan in name. They understood the peril of direct invocation. It was like summoning a demon, and on the ocean, things can get very superstitious. So they spoke about it with symbols or other names to let the fear stay formless and unprovoked, because to name it would be to summon it. I've read accounts that reek of madness, that seethe with the same unholy features described in Job's ancient lament. These coiling forms that the length of ships, these armored scales that defy iron, breath like smoke boiling the waves, which probably just means bubbles churning, the sea itself rebelling, swirling into vortexes, visions. There are some strange sightings recorded that have been referred to as something unexplainable that may be by the authors thought to be Leviathan. Near Greenland in 1734, Hans Egede saw it. He said its head was like a skull, breaching the ice-thick sea, wrinkled and ancient as if it predated Genesis itself. And then British officers aboard the HMS Daedalus in 1848, who were trained to conquer oceans, quailed before his serpent with a mane, a flame in the dying sun. And I've heard about this a number of times. I've heard of this serpent, this gigantic creature in the sea with a mane. They said that the creature coiled into obscene circles, geometry they had never seen. In 1905, naturalists off of Brazil beheld a neck that rose from the fathomless depths, glistening, scale-etched. They did not dare call it Leviathan, but the thought was there. Then we've already talked about the Kraken in the polar mists. Vikings spoke of this creature as a type of island, an island that sank when approached. Tentacles were vast enough to shatter hulls, a being that turned the sea to frothing madness, dragging entire fleets into oblivion. Job 41's words come to mind. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. Coincidence, though, is the comfort of being curious. If you say, well, it's all coincidence, everybody's just seeing stuff they don't know how to explain, I'm sure that makes you feel better, but is it true? There's a reason that humans, I mean, not all humans, there's a lot of people who love the sea more than anything. More, you know, and I imagine in that way it's similar to truck driving. Like, I used to be a truck driver, and when I would drive truck, you know, no, I don't want to get up and go to my truck at 3 a.m. in the morning, but I gotta get a move on. And once I've been driving for 2 hours or so, it's not a better job in the world, right? So there's a lot of people who find great comfort in the sea in the same way. And those people who have these types of stories can't all just be credited as insane people who don't know what they're seeing. Japanese scrolls depict dragons rising in steam and fog, scaled in armor no blade can pierce. Serpents that breathe vapor, choke the sky, and demand sacrifices. Chaos monsters that are only going to be subdued by something holy, something of divine edict. And thousands of miles away, thousands of years apart, we're still seeing these stories of dragons and gigantic sea monsters that could only be taken out by spiritual forces. And in the pages of many occult grimoires, the name Leviathan returns as a sigil of sort of forbidden wisdom. Demonologists know Leviathan as no beast, but a prince, an intelligent, cold prince, demon creature, you know, that speaks in the tongue of the abyss. It's not biology, it's invocation to summon him. And in that way, Leviathan could be a demon or a fallen one in the depths. There's nothing saying that he's not simultaneously some kind of great monster, but also a spiritual being, a message of something else. I don't really know. And honestly, nobody does. Everybody just has these ideas of what Leviathan is, but it's very possible that it can satisfy both parties. The parties that believe that it's mainly proverb, and the other party that believes that's a real creature. A real creature can do the work of proverbs as well. So it's possible that there is a conjunction there where there's room for both the Leviathan to be real and the Leviathan be a message. And in modern times, we still see monsters all the time in the sea. And every time we do, it's so creepy when you see the great shapes. We've got fishermen in backwater ports who mention seeing things in the water all the time. If you go to some of these little ocean towns, these sailors have stories. If you go on to, I don't know, Reddit or wherever anybody posts their stories, you read hundreds of stories from sailors who have seen things they cannot explain out in the middle of nowhere on the ocean. And that's not necessarily surprising. We don't know much about the ocean, and the average person knows even less than like the scientists know about the ocean. And when you're looking into the sea, it's almost impossible to get a perfect visual of what you're seeing most of the time. But a lot of these stories are very compelling and interesting, especially when you put them alongside sonar operators who have logged these shadows that should not exist, shapes the size of cities moving with grace through the ocean. We have these bizarre sounds and these bizarre lights. And yeah, sometimes the sea does spit out giant squid, whales, the apocalyptic oarfish, all those creatures, gigantic beings that we're just like, what the heck is this? All that kind of stuff. And those are monsters too. They're gigantic creatures. When I refer to those as monsters, I mean they're gigantic. They're monstrous creatures. But just because they exist does not mean that the more malicious monsters don't exist. Just because we can be like, oh, see a beached whale, this is obviously what a sea monster is. It's like, it's a sea monster, but there are more. I wanted to go back to the story of the frigate HMS Daedalus and what they encountered on August 6th, 1848, because I think it's just a fascinating story. And I don't really know how to say the captain's name. I think it's McCuhay. But he later described in a published official report that an enormous serpent, at least 60 feet long, had made contact with his ship. And this occurred in the South Atlantic, some 300 miles from the coast of present-day Namibia. 3 professional drawings of the animal were produced, and an excerpt for the day of the encounter from the diary of Lieutenant Drummond was also published, and a correspondent claiming to be an officer of the Daedalus later gave another confirming account 10 years later. The ship's log, officially accepted by the Royal Navy, not just something that somebody wrote in a diary, states that in latitude 24:44 south and longitude 9 degrees 22 east, the weather in latitude 24 degrees 44 south and longitude 9 degrees 22 east, the weather was dark and cloudy. The wind was fresh from the northwest with a long ocean swell from the southwest, and the ship on the port tack heading northeast by north. Something very unusual was seen by Mr. Sartoris, who was a midshipman aboard the Daedalus, and it was rapidly approaching the ship from before the beam. On our attention being called to the object, it was discovered to be an enormous serpent, with head and shoulders kept about 4 feet constantly above the surface of the sea as it moved towards them, and as nearly as we could approximate by comparing it with the length of what our main topsail yard would show in the water, there was at the very least 60 feet of the animal behind it, no portion of which was, to our perception, used in propelling it through the water, either by vertical or horizontal undulation. It passed rapidly, but so close under our lee quarter that had it been a man of my acquaintance, I should have easily been able to recognize his features with the naked eye. And it did not, either in approaching the ship or after it had passed our wake, deviate in the slightest degree from its course to the southwest, which it held on at the pace of from 12 to 15 miles per hour, apparently on some determined purpose. The diameter of the serpent was about 15 or 16 inches behind the head, which was, without any doubt, that of a snake, and it was never, during the 20 minutes that it continued in sight of our glasses, once below the surface of the water. Its color was a dark brown with yellowish white about the throat. It had no fins, but something like the mane of a horse, or some kind of bunch of seaweed, was washed about its back. He later added that he remembered the head as being a bit flat. It would have been difficult to write a report much more effective in public impact. Drummond, another aboard the ship for his part, wrote that we observed a most remarkable fish on our lee quarter, crossing the stern in a southwest direction. The appearance of its head, which with the back fin was the only portion of the animal visible, was long and pointed and flattened at the top, perhaps 10 feet in length, the upper jaw projecting considerably. The fin was perhaps 20 feet in the rear of the head and visible occasionally. The captain also asserted that he saw the tail or another fin about the same distance behind it. The upper part of the head and shoulders appeared of a dark brown color, and beneath the underjaw sort of a brownish white. It pursued a steady, undeviating course, keeping its head horizontal with the surface of the water and in rather a raised position, disappearing occasionally beneath a wave for a very brief interval and not apparently for purposes of respiration. It was going at the rate of perhaps from 12 to 14 miles an hour, and when nearest was perhaps 100 yards distant. In fact, it gave one quite the idea of a gigantic snake or eel. No one in the ship has ever seen anything similar, so it is at least extraordinary. It was visible to the naked eye for 5 minutes, and with a glass for perhaps 15 more. That's like the binoculars, or the binocular, the telescope, whatever. What are those called? The looking glass. I forget what they're called now. But the weather was, they said the weather was dark and squally at the time with some sea running. So maybe this serpent is trying to get somewhere before the storm. Who knows? But the anonymous officer who testified 10 years later wrote that the animal was moving at probably not less than 10 miles an hour, that the water was surging under its chest, and that it was not more than 200 yards away at its closest position, that it was in sight for about 10 minutes, and that the eye, the mouth, the nostril, the color, and the form were all distinctly visible. It should be noted that he was writing nearly a decade after the event, so of course maybe he's just trying to capitalize on something, who knows, but that doesn't eliminate the fact that the story has already been told. So coming out later and saying you're part of a story does not make the story false. It makes maybe you false, if anything. But this beast has been explained away as some known type of whale, and subsequently sort of dismissed with very little evidence that these sailors were ever inaccurately relaying what they had seen. But various animals washed on shore, and people compared it to the description, and they're like, okay, well, yeah, it's obviously this, but how can they possibly know when no pictures were taken, right? The monsters, the things, even sometimes just the normal things in the depths are horrifying, and it sounds as if they are meant to be. Just hearing how these things are described in basically every story. Gigantic, usually not on your team, usually trying to eat you in some sort of way, or at least extremely curious about you, which isn't a negative thing, but it's still scary when you're just floating there and they're bumping your feet below you. The way that we can't breathe in the water, the way that so many lives are lost at sea, the greatest graveyard on the planet. We are not meant for the sea. These things are supposed to be horrifying. Just hearing how they are described in basically every story, every legend, every scrap of lore. Most of these stories are written by or for humans, really driving the point home. Humans are not meant for the sea. At least not anymore. So why would we be restricted to only 30% of the planet? Less, even. The flood. Of course, it brought about a lot of water that wasn't here previously. It came from the fountains of the deep, came from the sky, firmament. It drowned all the land, and it left much of it submerged today. Is the sea scary for a reason? Is that a warning? Are all of these stories from all of these sailors throughout time, from the ancient past until now, the stories they're telling us, is the collection of the fact that there are so many of these stories, is that some sort of cosmic signal not to go to the sea? Is there something else in there that we have yet to awaken? When we are out there, is there something that watches, something that knows you're there, something that knows when a ship is within its zone? Because we know that these underwater creatures, even the ones that we verified, like dolphins and whales, and the ones that use, their own versions of sonar and echolocation and all that kind of stuff, they know when you're in the water. It's not like you can sneak up on a dolphin. So it's eerily factual that when you are upon the ocean, everything knows you're there. Everything. But you don't know what that everything is. And considering the flood was probably mainly to wipe out the Nephilim and obviously the evil that they had brought upon humanity, you really gotta wonder if some of those monsters just stayed in the depths. Some of those demonic entities are still down there. Davy Jones' locker, as fun as it is to imagine it, and everybody loved Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. I know I did. All that kind of stuff, like it's the Cthulhu references and everything. I love Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's just like there might be more to that than we give it credit for. There might actually be a demonic host in the depths of the ocean. When we talk about mermaids luring sailors into the depths and all that kind of stuff, very demonic activity. It's very rare that you hear about a good entity in the water there to help you. Most of the time, there are no reports of these beings came out of the water and helped us. There are some, especially like guiding lights and stuff like that. But most of the time, these things are trying to kill you. And they're usually using kind of like violence or sin, in a way, to get you into the water. And it's whether it's by guilt, there's feelings of extreme emotional guilt that are felt by sailors while they're out on the sea. There's feelings of just total loss. There's just no hope. All faith is just vaporized. There's stories of being summoned or called in because of lusty beings in the water. The monsters are still down there. Some of the most horrific monsters that we can think up are in the sea. What is it? Thalassophobia? Is it thalassophobia? Like, that is a thing, right? Thalassophobia. The fear of the deep. The fear of the water. There's, even when you're in the water and you just see big things like ships, you go under the water and you look up and you see just how far away safety is. just how far you would have to swim knowing you never could. Don't swim in the water, especially don't drink the water. Question every